It is good to be back. 2024 was a year full of assignments and work that left me little time on the mountain. Such is the fate of a part-time hermit. I do not have the pleasure to live here year-round, but I'm grateful for the time I get to spend here, even if in some years it is but little. When we last saw each other, it was spring, and I visually answered your question whether my extensive bulb planting project from last year had been successful. And indeed, when I picked up the camera again after a few months of hitting pause, everything was coming to life. Let's replay this. The small bird's flight was like that of a swift, but the color does not match. Any birder have an idea? With spring around the corner, it was time to build something that I had long wanted to build. Since the last onslaught of snow had damaged the pergola, it was time to replace and upgrade it. I was told that it had been a rainy fall. In fact, I had returned on the only second sunny day of the season. Was there still something to harvest in the garden? A pumpkin. And somehow this zucchini plant had survived the wet fall and still was producing at the beginning of November. A few years ago, I had built wattle fencing below an apple tree to dump leaves and mulch its base. It was getting brittle, so I decided to replace it with something more permanent. There is something that I hear quite often. Listen, Father, I respect you and all, especially because of your sumptuous beard in which you so elegantly preserve food and crumbs. But I myself am spiritual, not religious. I think I can understand what people often want to express when they say this. They want to indicate that they believe in something higher, that is meaningful to them. But either none of the religions out there really embody what they feel to be true, or what they feel, or they want to put some distance between themselves and the very fallible members of particular religions. In the Western context, the latter may come down to, I'm down with Jesus, but not with the church. Which sounds nice. You apparently get to keep the cool stuff, but rid yourself of all the church history, the failings, in short, the human element. In the coming weeks, I want to share some thoughts on this. Hopefully, some of you will find it helpful. And for that, I want to start with the most basic question. What is religion? When it is contrasted with spirituality in the way I hinted at, religion often refers to something organized, hence also the talk of organized religion as something negative in this context. Such a religion involves rules, rites, constraints, and all this puts a damper on exploration and creativity and on feeling your way through it. We will look at this particular point later. In this first reflection, I want to start with something basic. How religion was understood by the ancients, the Greek philosophers. And their religion actually appears in relation to something we probably all can get behind, even if we are neither spiritual nor religious. The attempt to lead a good life. When it comes to the quest for a good life, the ancients got it right. It is us moderns that have it wrong. For we think of a better life very often in terms of technological progress. A new iPhone, a new vacuum, a new electric car, a net zero home, new medical therapies, larger TVs, drone delivery, colonizing Mars, updating humanity, optimizing humanity with integrated technology as enthusiastically promised by transhumanists. Now, some of these things may be goods. They can improve aspects of our life. In that sense, they make life better. But they do not make us better. They do not make us good. To be fair, the technocrats also dream up utopias of world peace and human goodness, best managed by experts and elites. But this is only possible because these grandiose futuristic visions with robots, universal basic income and space travel forget one tiny detail: human nature, which in its core is utterly unaffected by all that bling. And that is why the Greeks were right after all. Their first question was not a technological one. How do I make a bigger sword? It was not even, how can I wield it more efficiently and to my advantage? Their most pertinent question was, when is it just to wield the sword? My point is not that the Greeks didn't fancy swords. neither that they could not differ or even err in the question of when to use them. My point is that unlike us modern technocrats, they recognized as the most important question a question of philosophy and not technology, that is, when and how should I act? That is why their quest for the perfection of humanity was fundamentally not about the conquest and subjugation of the cosmos, even though Alexander the Great set out to do exactly that. Rather, it was about what Alexander's teacher, Aristotle, had proposed. Not to conquer the world, but to conquer oneself. And that is why Alexander the Great is a chapter of history, but Aristotle is not, for his thought is very much alive. So let us look then at Aristotle's proposal, a proposal concerning the wielding of swords called virtue ethics. Virtue ethics departs from the following simple fact. There are certain powers within us. We have, for example, the power of reason. With it, we grasp and understand the things around us. We have the power of the will. The will is the power that inclines us to what we perceive as good in some way. We can be mistaken about the good, but if we perceive it as good, our will inclines us to it. It may even be something bad, but we choose it only insofar as we perceive some apparent good in it, something desirable. We have further an appetitive power that inclines us to things that evoke pleasure in the senses. This power serves the preservation of the individual through things such as food, and the preservation of the species through things which I will call procreation here, to avoid a more straightforward term that YouTube might fret over. And then we have a power directed at goods that are not pleasurable, at least in the short term. A power aiming at the difficult good despite obstacles and dangers. All of these are what the Greeks called the powers of the soul. Reason and will are the defining powers as they render our particular nature rational. But this does not mean that we always act rationally. We may be influenced by our passions or emotions. Emotions can move us to action or inaction. That can be a good thing, or it can be problematic if the emotions take over the reins from reason. Fear, for example, is an emotion. Fear is good. It will prevent you from risky business on a cliff's edge. But if fear takes control, we are in trouble. Fear may paralyze us or let us act irrationally in some other way. So the emotions are good, but they need to be ordered by reason. All right, so we have the powers and the passions or emotions. That's all great. Having the powers is one thing, using them another. And using them in a good way is obviously where the rubber meets the road. The Greek thinkers figured out that the best way to use them is a kind of mean between deficiency and excess. But with this, they did not mean mediocrity, but an optimum. This will be clear from the following example. Take sports. You want to be a runner. Now, you could train 2 minutes a day, or you could train 20 hours a day. One way of training will be too little, but the other will be too much. Yet somewhere between 2 minutes and 20 hours lies your optimum, which the Greeks called arete, meaning excellence. The Romans came to call it virtus, from the Latin for a particular kind of strength. And from that the English language has taken the word virtue. A virtue is possessed by a person that habitually, and thus with greater ease, exercises a particular power in an excellent or optimal way. And each power is understood to be perfected by one chief virtue. The power of practical reason, the question of which is, what should I do, is perfected by the virtue of prudence. The will is perfected by justice, seeking the right relation to others. The virtue of the appetitive power directed to sense goods is called temperance. And the power concerning difficult goods receives its excellence through the virtue of fortitude. These 4 virtues, prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude, are called cardinal virtues, to underline their importance. And then next to them are many other particular virtues relating to particular objects or situations. We don't have to go into further detail here, except for justice. Simple justice is rendering another their due according to equality. Okay, but there are circumstances where the other is not equal, and yet the demands of justice still apply. An officer or teacher, for example, might be equal to you inasmuch as both of you are human, but their office, when rightly exercised on behalf of a legitimate authority, creates an inequality. To illustrate, a police officer can fine you for speeding, enforcing a law that the community, through its elected representatives, has agreed upon to serve the common good. Karen, from next door, cannot fine you. The police officer and Karen from next door are equal as persons, but they do not have the same authority. In that point, they are unequal. The virtue annexed to justice that concerns this particular inequality can be called respect, meaning you owe the police officer a respect that you don't owe in the same way to Karen. Take another case. There are your parents, without whom you would not be here. In that sense, you are not equal to them. You owe them your life. And thus, despite their human failings, it is right and just to give them honor, whatever that may look like in a concrete case. Honoring your parents is a virtue annexed to justice in this particular case of inequality. Lastly, all of us find ourselves in the most unequal of all relationships from the get-go, our relationship with God. Now you might say, hang on, I don't believe in a God. And I would say, okay, we can talk about arguments for or against the existence of God. But it is not necessary to do so here. To understand our current exploration of Greek thinking, you don't need to believe in God. You just need to understand what happens if you held that there was a God, or gods. In that case, justice obviously requires to render to God, or the gods, what is due to them. Now, if that deity has created the entire universe with you in it, everything is due to it. That God owes you nothing, and you owe that God everything. So, how can you give to God what you owe? Well, you can't, because of the sheer inequality. But it seems reasonable that any person that could be called just would at least seek for ways to give to God what is due in some measure. We will look into our feeble human attempts at this in the next episode. In this very basic consideration, the only point is this. Anyone who believes in a deity and desires to be just will try to give that deity its due. And this virtue, next to justice, the Greeks called religion. We are not talking here about particular religions, or even the actions that are associated with religion across cultures. We are only talking about the general demands of the virtue of justice. And one such demand for a person believing in a higher power is the virtue of religion, which is annexed to the virtue of justice on account of this particular inequality. What does all of this mean for our opening question concerning religion and spirituality? If we understand religion in the sense laid out here, then religion, that is, religious action, is a demand of justice. For the virtue of religion, being a part of justice, regulates my relationship with the divine. It responds to a claim that the divine has on me. It responds to a debt and obligation that I have to the divine. And any just person will seek to address this debt in some manner. Now, let us contrast this with spirituality, at least as the word is often used in the West today. Spirituality is rarely viewed in terms of a debt, something I owe in justice to a higher power. More often than not, it is a kind of extra thing, a kind of tapping into something deeper, a potential. It is often connected with my well-being. For example, how meditation or certain forms of yoga bring me peace and calm. Spirituality is really often about me and how I want to feel about myself. Now, it is quite possible that you, dear viewer, use spirituality in a different sense and with a lot more qualifications. But if I'm on the right track, there is a core difference between the two approaches that religion and modern spirituality propose. And in the end, it might go back to the question, is the divine something that transcends me, the source of my being, the giver of life, the fountain of all, whom I owe everything? Or is the divine something that I tap into, that I use, some energy that I can indeed make subservient to my needs, desires, wants, or well-being?